Hey Gabe, it's Mrs. Owens. So we're going to go ahead and get you started on the next unit, which we have been starting this week. Um, so you already turned in your Romeo and Juliet final draft, which was due at the end of last week, which is good. The only thing that we need to do now is get you started with our next unit, which is over nonfiction. We haven't spent a ton of time doing nonfiction this year, so the rest, all of April, all of May, our focus is going to be on getting you guys ready for analysis of nonfiction, the different terms and things that you're going to see when you're looking at nonfiction when we're discussing nonfiction, and also that book that you should have gotten. I sent it home with Serenity, but it looks like this. We're going to be reading a little bit out of it as well. It is a nonfiction book that's like telling us about the food industry in the United States, and where our food comes from and all that good stuff. So we're going to use that as our big nonfiction text. But before we do that, we've got to talk about the different nonfiction analysis terms and talk about how to analyze nonfiction. So on this assignment that I'm posting for you, you're going to see a couple of different things. This handout right now that's on the screen, I'm going to go ahead and take you through it. Zoom in a little bit so you can see better. All right, so the handout here starts with some terms that I just want to briefly go through with you here. Things like claim and audience, we know those already, right? Claim we just did with our argumentative essays. Your audience is the people who you are trying to target with whatever you're writing. Concession, evidence, those things also came up in our argumentative writing. Concessions when you're just admitting that there's another side to the argument for your audience. And then evidence, of course, is like the quotes and stuff that you're using to support your side of the argument. But we've also got some terms on here that we are going to be like really focusing in on. Things like fact and opinion, and what's the difference between a fact and an opinion. We had a discussion on Monday about some of these things, and we basically came to the conclusion that a fact is always true. No matter what you do, it's a truth that cannot be denied. And an opinion, of course, is just a feeling that you have based on your own personal preferences. There's some things that happen because of opinion. Things like bias, right? It's a personal judgment that you have for or against something. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you're biased against the color purple because it was your sister's favorite color and you hated that. I don't, something like that, right? But it's just some kind of unreasonable judgment that you have for or against something. We talk about a lot of bias when we discuss things like race or gender. People have certain biases about those things. And then we've got another couple of terms here that are going to come up quite a bit when we talk about nonfiction. Objective and subjective. Here's the only difference. One includes opinion and one does not. So objective writing has zero opinion. There's no opinion in it at all. It's just giving you facts and things that can be proven to be true. And then something that is subjective that is written includes opinion. So for instance, more objective texts would be things like factual newspaper reports or science reports that you're doing to kind of like report on whatever experiment you were doing. Right? Those are supposed to be mostly, if not all, fact. Now, are they at least a little bit subjective? Yeah, I mean, you have to decide which facts to include and which facts not to include, and that requires opinion. But for the most part, we would say that those are more objective texts. You're using mostly fact. Subjective then is writing that includes bias. So you have some bias. A persuasive speech would be a subjective text. An opinion piece in a newspaper would be a subjective text, right? They're including their bias. They might be giving you some facts, but there's still a lot of bias going on in there. All right, we've got speaker, which is like this idea you create of yourself in your writing. When you write something, the speaker isn't you exactly. It's like who you want the reader to believe you are, right? We present ourselves a little bit different than we actually are in our writing because we're trying to sound more intelligent or we're trying to sound more believable. So we're not entirely the same as the speaker. It's who, this persona that we want someone to believe that we are. And then the last term, here's where we're really focusing in this week, is on appeals. So when someone is trying to persuade you of something, they're going to do it in a few different ways. These are terms that are going to come up a lot in your high school career when you're doing especially like rhetorical analysis essays later on in high school. you're going to be talking about these three types of appeals. They sound fancy because they're Latin words, but they're really not that fancy. So the three types of appeals are ethos, pathos, and logos. Um, all three of these are used to try to convince people of something or make them do something. You see them a lot in advertisements. So I'm going to go through them right here on this assignment. It essentially like takes you through examples of the different appeals, explains what they are, and then it asks you to give your own example of an ethos appeal, and a pathos appeal, and a logos appeal. So you're just going to type an answer. That's all you're doing on this document, is typing one answer of what that appeal could look like, or an example of what that appeal could look like. So the first appeal here that we've got is an ethos appeal. And that word is very similar. It has the same root as the word ethic or ethics, right? If you say someone has really good ethics, you're saying they're a moral person, they're trustworthy, they're believable. So an ethos appeal is you trying to convince someone to do something based on your believability and credibility, and the fact that you have experience and are maybe like a good person. So you'll see these a lot with like people referencing doctors. Um, 9 out of 10 doctors recommend this treatment, right? So you should use this treatment because they know what they're talking about, right? Doctors have a lot of credibility. They're believable. They've studied for a very long time. So you should do this. Or you might see like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend this toothpaste brand over all other brands. That would also be an ethos appeal, right? So if anyone is trying to convince you that they have experience, that they know what they're talking about, or they're citing really strong sources that do have a lot of experience and know what they're talking about, they're trying to convince you by using their authority and their experience and their believability to get you to do something. So there's some examples that are listed here on the document. Things like, as a doctor, I'm qualified to tell you. The veterinarian says that an Australian Shepherd would be the best dog. Well, of course, a veterinarian would know, right? Doctors all over the world recommend this type of treatment. So all of those are appeals. They're trying to get you to believe or do what they're saying by using believability and credibility. So you're just going to type an example of an ethos appeal on that document. That's literally it. Think of maybe one that you've seen in a commercial, an advertisement of any kind. That's what you're going to put there. All right. The next type of appeal is a pathos appeal. When you think of the word pathos, I'm going to type this on the document here just a second so you can see it. When you think of the word pathos, think of the word empathy, right? We talked about empathy when we did To Kill a Mockingbird this year, right? And empathy is truly understanding how someone else feels, right? If you have empathy for someone, you understand how they feel in a certain situation. It's the same root. So a pathos appeal is an emotional appeal. When you hear pathos, think empathy, 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 right? You understand how someone else feels. So a pathos appeal here is you are trying to convince someone to do something or believe something by engaging their emotions, basically, is what you're doing. You're either trying to scare them into doing something, or you're trying to make them really happy so that they like your brand and product and want to buy from you. Or perhaps you're trying to make them angry at your opponent so that they'll believe you and vote for you, perhaps. Right? So anytime that they're trying to engage your emotions, that would be a pathos appeal. When you think of commercials, a lot of things that not just what you're seeing, but hearing are pathos appeals, like music. I want you to start paying attention when you see an advertisement to the music they're playing in the background, because they're trying to make you feel certain things with that music, whether it is really happy music in the background to get you energetic, or something very sad and slow to make you feel somber and depressed, right? Like they're trying to manipulate you with that music in the background. Start paying attention, even in movies, right? There's always music playing. They're trying to make you feel a certain way. So think of music as well. Other things that you can think of are like color schemes in advertisements, right? Like if all of the colors are really drab and dark and boring, perhaps they're trying to make you feel depressed. Or if everything's really bright, really vibrant colors, maybe they're trying to make you feel happy or excited, right? So it's not just the things that you're reading, but also the things that you're visually seeing and also hearing that could be pathos appeals. There are entire degrees in college that people use advertising to try to learn how to appeal to people using things like pathos and engaging your emotions, even subconsciously, without you even realizing it's happening. They study how to do that. So on the sheet here, I gave you a bunch of different pathos appeal examples. A lot of the ones that you're going to see here aren't like super clear emotions, you kind of got to think about it for a second. Like, for instance, the very last bullet, it says, better men than us have fought and died to preserve this great nation. Now is our turn to return the favor for God and country, gentlemen, right? That is like a call to patriotism, right? You should fight for your country, which for a lot of people, patriotism is like a big emotion, a big draw, a big feeling there. So that's something that we would say would be a pathos appeal. You've got feelings of like wanting to keep tradition. Where would we be without this tradition? Ever since our forefathers landed at Plymouth Rock, right? You could say maybe that's a little bit of patriotism too, but also like this idea that tradition is super important and we should preserve it. But again, you've also got things like, you should consider another route. I heard that that street is far more dangerous and ominous at night than during the daytime, right? Like that is somebody trying to convince you to do something by trying to scare you, right? Politicians try to use pathos appeals a lot to try to scare people into voting for them. Maybe they try to make someone frightened that something will happen if you don't vote for this individual. They're the only person that can prevent this horrible thing from happening, and you should vote for them. So pathos appeals get used a lot. And for a lot of people, those are the most effective appeals. So now we've got ethos, right? We've got using your credibility, your believability, your experience to convince someone. Now we've got emotion. And then the last type of appeal is a logos appeal. And a logos appeal is going to be, sounds like the word logic, right? Logos, logic. It's when someone is trying to convince you using reason, logic, facts, data, demonstration, all of those things that are reasonable, logical appeals. So you'll see, like in the examples here, the data is perfectly clear. More than 100 peer-reviewed studies have been conducted. The algorithms have been run in 1,000 different ways, and the math continues to check out. You don't need to jump off a bridge to know it's a bad idea. Now, that one is not like a piece of data or a fact or a scientific study. That's just like common sense. They've logically deduced that it is a stupid idea to jump off a bridge, right? You shouldn't do that. That's still a logos appeal, right? They're still using reason and logic to convince you. So what you're going to do, I know I forgot to say it on this one, but where it says write your own example of a pathos appeal, you're going to write, okay, what is an emotional appeal maybe that I've seen in an advertisement or a commercial? Same thing for logos here. What would be an example of a logos appeal? When might someone use data, information, or when have you seen someone use data and maybe scientific studies to try to convince someone of something? So that's the first thing you're going to do is go through this handout, kind of look at it, answer with examples of those different appeals. The other thing that we just finished today, Wednesday, is trying to analyze these appeals in a written text. So we're trying to find, when is this individual in this text using ethos, pathos, and logos to convince us of something? And then we're answering some analysis questions that follow. So what I'm going to do on this assignment, just like I did with the students in classes, I'm going to take you through the first few paragraphs together so that you can see exactly how this is going to go and what you're kind of looking for as you're analyzing these different appeals. And then I'll have you do the last 3 paragraphs. So you've got U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood, preventing hundreds. So those last 3 paragraphs, I'm going to have you guys do, or have you guys, it's just you, sorry, have you singularly do this by yourself so you can see if you can identify these different appeals. All right. So I'm going to start at the very beginning of the document here. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to identify, okay, when are they using ethos? When is she trying to use credibility to convince me? When is she using pathos? When is she trying to engage my emotions to convince me? And when is she using logos? When is she using facts and data to try to convince me of this? Now, this article is called The Devastating Consequences of Distracted Driving. So I'm sure you can probably guess what she's going to try to convince us not to do. But let's see whether or not you think it's effective and what kind of appeal she's using to try to convince us of this. So we've got, a few seconds can change a life forever. It was April 18th, 2010, when Aaron Brookins, then age 19, was driving home after spending the weekend with his girlfriend, Kelly. As he sped down Interstate 90 at 75 miles an hour, he decided to send her a quick text. When he looked up from his phone, he saw a towering wall of white zooming toward him as his truck slammed into the rear of a slow-moving semi. His vehicle slid almost entirely underneath the semi, and it took first responders nearly an hour to free Aaron from the wreckage. He was airlifted to a local hospital with 2 broken femurs, a fractured knee and ankle, cuts to his internal organs, and nerve damage to both of his legs. He was told he may never walk again. All right. So just immediately reading this, I can see that she's trying to make me feel something, right? I'm supposed to feel bad for Aaron. I'm supposed to be a little scared. Oh no, maybe this could happen to me too. So primarily, this first paragraph, if we look in the instructions, it says pathos is going to be pink. This first paragraph, she's trying to make me feel some stuff. She's trying to make me feel bad for him. So I'm going to highlight in pink. Now, it's not just pink though, right? Like if I'm looking at this, I'm also seeing a lot of facts. I'm seeing the date that this happened. I'm seeing how old he was. I'm seeing the speed at which he was driving and where he was driving. I'm seeing the resulting injuries that he got after his accident. Okay, so I'm also going to highlight some of this in yellow because I'm seeing a lot of like facts being thrown out at me as well. So I'm going to go through here. I'm going to highlight some of the stuff in yellow, seeing some of these appeals happening. Yellow. He was airlifted with 2 broken femurs, internal organs, nerve damage to both of his legs. Okay, so a lot of different like logos appeals, facts, showing us like what could happen. These are factual things that have happened to someone else when they were distracted driving. All right, let's look at this next paragraph. According to a new survey released by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, when I copied this over from our PDF here, I'm saying it didn't copy perfectly. Approximately 660,000 American drivers text, tweet, make phone calls, or otherwise use technology in a way that distracts them from driving. Now that number is a little off because this was from 2013. That number would be a lot higher today. But I'm noticing a couple of appeals here, right? The first thing that she did in a sentence was she said, according to a new survey released by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Now, when you cite a credible source, like the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, that makes what you're saying sound more believable and more credible. I'm not going to believe our author's name here is Zoe Franklin. I'm not going to just believe Zoe Franklin and data and facts that she's giving me for no reason. I don't know who Zoe Franklin is. She has no credibility on her own. But when she cites these very specific, credible sources, she builds her credibility. You do the same thing when you're writing an essay and you cite other sources. You build your credibility and believability because as a high school student, as Gabe Strong all by yourself, you don't always have a lot of credibility depending on what you're talking about. But when you cite other sources that do have a lot of knowledge and credibility on the subject that you're speaking about, it makes you sound more believable too. So this first part, when she cites her source, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, that's green. That's going to be an ethos appeal. She is making us believe her a little bit more. I'm more convinced now because I know where her information is coming from. All right. Now the rest of that, though, she's giving me a study. So that's going to be all yellow. That's all a fact. So I'm going to highlight that in yellow for logos. All right, let's keep going here. And this is only a fraction of the problem. A 2012 AAA driving study. Okay. Again, she's citing a credible source. I'm going to make it an ethos appeal. That while 6.7% of teen drivers drove while distracted by an electronic device, more than twice as many drivers, 15.1%, drove while engaged in other distracting activities, including adjusting controls, grooming, eating or drinking, reaching for an object inside the car, communicating with people outside of the car, turning around to see the back seat, and reading. Any activity that takes a driver's eyes off the road and hands off the wheel endangers the driver, passengers, and bystanders. Okay, so again, seeing a lot of facts, right? The study's listing percentages. It's talking about ways that people are driving distracted and that all of those things are dangerous. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight those in yellow. Now that last sentence, let's look at it a little bit again. Any activity that takes a driver's eyes off the road and hands off the wheel endangers the driver, passengers, and bystanders. That also sounds kind of like she's trying to scare us a little bit, right? She's trying to make us feel like if we do this, we're endangering people. We could hurt them. If we're driving distracted, it could hurt people, right? She uses the word endangered. So I'm going to take like the second half of that sentence and I'm going to highlight that pink. Because yeah, it's a fact, but she's trying to give us a scary fact there. She wants us to feel a little bit afraid. Driving while distracted can have devastating consequences. Again, that is a fact. Yes, it definitely can. But also, it's trying to scare me. She's trying to make me feel like if I do this, I'm going to kill people or I'm going to hurt people. right? So I'm going to highlight it yellow. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Highlight it yellow, and then on the other side, I'm going to highlight the rest of the sentence pink. Because it's a fact, but she's trying to scare me with it a little bit. In 2011, 3,331 people were killed in crashes involving a distracted driver. An additional 387,000 people were injured in motor vehicle crashes involving a distracted driver. In recent years, many states have banned texting and limited the use of cell phones while driving. However, as our nation's laws are getting tougher on one of the most common sources of driver distraction, distracted driving continues to cause fatalities and permanent injuries. Okay, so again, I've got a lot of facts here. Just give me a lot of data about distracted driving and the problems it can cause. However, that's not it. I'm seeing some emotional appeals too, right? Like, she's trying to scare us. Distracted driving continues to cause fatalities and permanent injuries, right? Like, she's still trying to scare me a little bit. Even though they're outlawing it and trying to get rid of it, it's not perfectly working here and people are still getting hurt. All right, so I've given you this first part. When I assign it, I'm going to make sure that you have all that highlighting so you can see examples, just like I'm showing you here in this video. But you are going to go ahead and finish the final 3 paragraphs, highlighting it with your own indicator of ethos, pathos, and logos. I'm going to tell you right now, you have at least one more ethos appeal. You've got a lot more logos and at least a few more things you could highlight with pathos here as you are analyzing this rest of this article. All right. Now, you've got some analysis questions to complete at the bottom, and these are focused solely on appeals and also like whether or not those appeals are effective and what she's doing here in this article. So the first question says, what is the author's central idea and purpose in writing this article? Those do not mean the same thing, right? A central idea is like your main idea. So overall, what is she talking about? That's what you're answering there for number 1. But the second part of that is the purpose of the writing. So purpose of a piece of writing is not the same as what is it about. The purpose is, what was she trying to do with this piece? What was her end goal? So her as a writer, what was she trying to do to Gabe? What was she trying to get you to do by the end of this passage? That's what her purpose is. So you got kind of 2 different things going on there. Central idea and purpose are not exactly the same. Now, number 2, 3, and 4, all it's asking you to do is tell me how she uses ethos, how she uses pathos, and how she uses logos, and give me an example. You could literally just copy and paste examples from higher up in the passage. That's totally fine. And then the last thing that you've got there is a question that's asking you to kind of analyze the effectiveness of her argument, of the way that she's trying to persuade us with these appeals. So do you think that her use of ethos, pathos, and logos in this article was effective? Why or why not? Now, if it was effective, that means it convinced you, Gabe Strong, not to drive distracted. If it convinced you, if you feel like at the end of this, reading this article, you're like, I'm probably not going to do it. She kind of convinced me. Then you would say it's an effective article. If you don't think it's convinced you and you're still going to use your cell phone or be distracted while you're driving because you just, it didn't really convince you, then you would say no, it's not effective. You've got a few more like mini questions inside that question. It says, how did these techniques strengthen her argument? So which of her appeals do you think was the strongest? Do you think her emotional appeal was the strongest? Do you think her ethical appeal, the believability when she cited her evidence, was the strongest? Or do you think it was her logos appeals, her facts that she was giving you? And then the last question there is kind of asking, if you had to change anything to make this article even more persuasive, how could you make this even more persuasive than it already is? Because there are ways that you could probably convince yourself, if you had to edit it, better not to drive distracted. So how could you do that? How could you convince yourself? What changes could you make to make this a little bit more convincing? All right, so that's it. That's all you're doing for Monday through Wednesday's assignments, is kind of going through this first handout. You really want to make sure you understand what these 3 appeals are and what those terms mean. Give me examples of each of the appeals on there. And then the last part that you're doing here is finishing your highlighting and then trying to answer those analysis questions. So that's it, Gabe. That's all you got for Monday through Wednesday. Tomorrow in class on Thursday, we are going to be analyzing commercials. So we're going to be watching actual commercials and analyzing those, seeing if there's ethos, pathos, and logos and how they're trying to convince us in the commercials to buy their product or do whatever it is that they want us to do. So we will analyze those. I'm going to post that assignment for you probably Thursday after school, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to say that because I've got the track meet I got to do after school on Thursday. We'll see if I can get it. Maybe I can do it during my prep time tomorrow. Record another video for you and all that stuff. So keep an eye out for that assignment for Thursday. And then we're moving into our reading unit. We're going to start doing Fast Food Nation. Well, it's called Chew on This, but it's just a new version of Fast Food Nation, which was a very popular book talking about the food industry. So we're going to pretty much start that starting on Friday. We don't have a ton of time here before the end of the semester. So we're going to have to kind of move a little bit more quickly through that than I wanted to, but we're definitely going to be reading some of the book there as well. So keep your eyes posted. I'll get that second assignment posted tomorrow. But for right now, you just want to work on these two things. If you have any questions, please send me an email. That's the only way that this is going to work, is if you communicate with me, because I'm not going to be able to understand that you're confused if you're not sending me emails and asking me questions. I want to make sure that you can get through the rest of this school year here, Gabe, and not have to do any repeating of anything. That would be awful. I don't want that to happen to either of us. I don't want you to have to do it, and I don't want to have to do it again with you. It seems kind of silly. We can get you through this year. So make sure you're communicating with me so that I can help you when you have questions. Okay, bud? All right. Hope you're doing okay. Miss having you in class. I'll see you in a little bit when I make another video tomorrow.